And we are getting started, and it looks like I have someone to admit. Okay. Welcome aboard if you're joining us by Zoom. We're going to get started. It is 11:32. I'm a little bit late. We're going to be working on tax-advantaged investing today. Going to talk about tax allocation, types of accounts. So that's where we're going today. Before we get started, though, we have to have a little conversation about what's coming. Now, I'm going to see if we have any questions in the chat. I don't see any questions. If you have a question on Zoom, post it in the chat. But one question I had this week had to do with doing a workshop. So we talked about this in our 10 o'clock class, a capstone workshop with two major objectives. One is my objective, which is to do a kind of an overview of the course to help refresh you for what you learned this semester in the context of financial planning and creating a financial plan. So that's one objective for the capstone workshop, is to do a good solid review of the course. But the second, and probably the one you're most, no doubt, the one you're most interested in, is to do a capstone workshop where I answer your questions and help you make sure that you've checked all the boxes that you need to check to make sure that your data cards are where they need to be in your financial plan, so that you can earn all 200 points in your capstone assignment. So again, we had this conversation, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. We had this conversation in the early class, and we agreed that students who had questions about anything you've done in your financial plan, this would be a good week for you to put together a little email and just send me your question. Tell me what you're struggling with. Tell me specifically in your planning portal what you would like me to address in the workshop. So maybe you're good to go. Maybe you don't have any questions. You've gotten full points on all your assignments. You can email me that. But and you can post this or you can email. I'd really like you to email me if you have a question that you're struggling with. And I'm going to grab all of those and I'm going to put together a good, solid capstone workshop. And this, by the way, will be part of this week's assignment. Your class collaboration for this week is to send me your question. Tell me what it is you would like me to address on the workshop. And if it's just generic, like, just give me a good just whatever you want to tell me, but that's your responsibility to reach out to me this week and to capture that with a screenshot. And you can do that by email. You can do it by posting in Money Study Group, or you can post it in YouTube or Facebook. I don't care how you post it. If you have a question that you really want to make sure I address, probably should send me an email and then post it as well. Make sense? Any questions about that? So that's the capstone workshop, which I'm going to be preparing for next week. Now, here's the part where I'm going to try to sell you my 11:30 class on what we agreed to in the 10 o'clock class, and that is this. So before I try to sell it to you, do you need a hand there? I can help you if you do. Are you okay? That looks painful. No problem. Oh, it's a mask. I thought it was a neck brace. I don't have my glasses. Okay, good. So I want to remind you that when we started this semester, we had a soft opening. I got COVID. Everybody was getting Omicron. And then I made the choice to offer you a choice about whether you wanted to meet in person or online. And you guys, a lot of you came back with, in this 11:30 session, you came back with, hey, I signed up for a live classroom, and so I had no choice and really wanted to accommodate what you wanted, which was to meet in the classroom. But I also went a step beyond and said, for those of you who voted for online on demand, I wanted to make that possible for you. So I did that. I brought my gear, I set it up, I taught 2 classes pretty much every, week in this classroom. Not every week. You guys have given me some grace. We took last week off because of a mix-up with assignment due dates. But all that to say, I'm asking you for your permission and your blessing next week to do our class online at 10 a.m., which means if you're not available at 10 a.m. for the Zoom, you would be able to get that on YouTube after that, so at 11:30 or whatever. So that's what I'm hoping you guys will agree to in the 11:30 session. That's what I told the 10 a.m. class that I would do. I'm confident that I can put together a capstone workshop that can help you be successful in your capstone assignment. But what I would like is to be able to do that from my office. It's much easier for me to put together good content there and have it ready for the 10 a.m. as opposed to having to come here and set up and do two sessions. So does anybody have any suggestions, comments, input, objections? Now's your time to speak up about that plan. A capstone workshop, which will be online next week at 10 a.m. and only at 10 a.m. And it'll be available. I'll be available all week by email. The capstone assignment is a 2-week, so you'll have time to reach out to me if you have questions, and I will be happy to do an additional kind of tutorial video if necessary, but that's going to be determined by your feedback, by your questions. But right now I'm asking you, I'm trying to sell you on the idea of a capstone workshop next week at 10 a.m. via Zoom and not meeting live. Dun, 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 dun. Do I see some disappointed faces? No disappointment? No problem? And you can speak up.
I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it at 10, but you said it's going to be on YouTube.
Oh, yeah, it'll be posted. So you just watch it on YouTube or Facebook. It'll be in the playlist. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now I'm going to check my chat box to see who is speaking to me on Zoom. It's really interesting to me. I mean, I'm not going to say much except that we have had not a very full classroom, right? Would you agree? We've got a full house today. I mean, there's no room, no elbow room. Am I right? Wrong. Anyway, one of the things I've decided to do is teach online. The University of Houston has given me the ability to teach my courses online moving forward, so that's what I'll be doing. And I think I took your input this semester, and I've come to believe that you guys prefer, in general, to have the online on-demand experience. I know we all like and appreciate being in the classroom, but the majority have been very clear about that. And so the proof, the evidence is here for me. I mean, I'm looking at my Zoom right now, and we have 3 people, and one of them is from the 10 a.m. So if you were me, you'd make the same decision, I think. So moving forward, that's been my decision. It's been a blessing to get to be with you this semester. I've enjoyed it. I really have, and I appreciate it. And I really appreciated your strong demand to stick to the in-class deal. I mean, I did. I respected that and appreciated it and tried to accommodate everyone, and I think that's worked okay, but I know it'll be better. It'll be easier, more efficient to do one versus both. And so it's going to be online moving forward. So tell your friends, and thank you for being here for this experiment, this experience. It's been good. Okay, let's talk about tax-advantaged investing. So what I want to do first, since, I did this last in the first class, and I'm just going to tell you, if you're here in the class, I'm going to jump into the assignment and give you a review of this week's assignment. And there's a part of this assignment that is specifically for the students who are not here. They're not here in person and they're not on Zoom. They're and we have a good number of students who don't watch the Zoom. They don't get the lecture. They just blow it off. And that's why this is part of this week's assignment. I'm going to scroll all the way down to show you what will be in this week's. Oh, I went too far, didn't I? So this is something I did while I was teaching online, and I'm implementing it for this week only for students who are not here. I want an outline of my lecture. I want you to say, here's the topic, here's what time it started, here is the next topic, here's what time it started. So I've given you just a little kind of explanation for what that would look like, but you need to include this in your assignment unless you're in the classroom right now. If you're in the classroom right now, you're exempt. You just tell me, I was in the classroom, and I know who's in the classroom. So if you want to try to fake me out, bring it. Don't do it. You'll be sorry. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, you wouldn't do that. If you're in the classroom, you're exempt. If you're on Zoom, you need to do this. So start taking notes now. Just jot down what I'm talking about, when I started, and when I transition to the next topic, what the topic is and the time. Okay? Fair enough? And again, that is for the students who have demonstrated to me that if I don't make you accountable, you're going to miss it. And that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So good luck with that. It shouldn't be difficult. Just take notes as you watch this. If I were you and I'm watching this on YouTube, I would do double time. Do you know how to make a YouTube video play at twice the speed? I would do that every time because you can listen a lot faster than I can talk. It's just true. So, I mean, it's one of the benefits of watching it later, and I would do that because I'm that way. I don't want to waste my time. And so hopefully what I'm going to talk about today is not a waste of time. I'm going to try to make it very valuable, and let's get started. So I think I've told this story before about JD. Remember, I told this, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but the story is I was a State Farm agent in Clear Lake. I was the first and only certified financial planner in the Houston area who could actually charge a fee for financial planning. So I would meet with clients, I would help them build a financial plan, and I had this assumption because I was in this really nice neighborhood with million-dollar homes, and people would come to my office in nice Mercedes and new cars, and what was my assumption about the people in my neighborhood where my office was? Yeah, that they were basically wealthy, well off, doing fine. But I came to see that that wasn't always true because people were living on debt and they were buried in debt. But then one day, this guy shows up in my office. He called, made an appointment, but his name was JD. He was a friend of mine. He and I had taught Little League to our kids together. I mean, we coached Little League with our kids. And he lived in the same neighborhood I did, which was a neighborhood with small house, and we both drove minivans, old minivans, and we were pretty much the kind of person you would think was like the, not wealthy, like not the people living in my neighborhood where my office was. And he comes in my office and he says, Jim, I'm glad to meet with you. I appreciate it. I want to get a second opinion on my financial plan. I've been doing it on my own all this time and just thought it'd be good to get another set of eyeballs on it. So I'm like happy to help, JD. He sets down his information. I open up his accounts and I'm like, dude, you know what? You're a millionaire. Like you've got over $1 million saved. He's like, yeah, I know. I don't know. Like, I didn't really have a plan. Well, kind of did. My plan was simple, he said. The IRS makes these rules. Like, for example, the IRS tells you how much you can put in your 401k. JD said, well, based on that rule, it seemed to me that since they made that a limitation, it would be smart to take advantage of however much they let me put in my 401k. So then every time they increased that, or every time I got a raise at work, I would save more money, and whenever they increased the limits on that 401k, I would, instead of buying a new house or a new car or a boat, I would just take that money and and save more. And he said, and then in 1998, they came out with this thing called a Roth IRA. He said, Jim, that's like a tax-free investment account. And he said, my wife doesn't work. She's not never worked, but because of my earned income, I was able to contribute to my wife's Roth IRA. So I started doing that in 1998, and I've done it every year. And every time the IRS increases the contribution limit, I would increase my contribution. That was his plan. And that's where I got the second law of personal finance, the law of tax advantaged investing. The IRS makes the rules. Your job is to take advantage of those rules. I got all of that. Everything that I'm going to teach you today came right from JD, my friend who was the coach, who lived in the little bitty house and drove the old minivan, and he was the millionaire next door. And I wanted to be like JD. At that point, I had not done any of the things JD had done, and it was still kind of early enough in my career where I had time to start doing what he was doing, and it paid off tremendously for me, obviously for JD, and I want it to be something that pays off for you. And so today's lesson is really just a summary of the types of accounts that you will have access to that will help you apply JD's very simple plan, which is basically tax advantaged investing. So that's what we're going to do today. And that's what you're going to study this week as you do your homework. You're going to learn about these different types of accounts. And you're going to get to see what the differences are. And I don't expect you to become an expert. I just want you to know the difference between a 401k and a Roth IRA. And you will by the end of the week. In fact, you will by the end of this lecture. You'll know the difference between a 401k and a Roth IRA. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is jump over here to my buckets. I teach this every semester, and I always bring these buckets. But guess what I forgot this week? I forgot my buckets. So now you have to just see pictures of buckets. But there are 4 buckets and a shovel. Does anybody know what the shovel's for? Did I tell you that story? Let me take a sip of water and I'll tell you this story about the bucket before we begin, because the bucket is critical to this plan. I'm going to teach you a word. It's called earned income. It's very important, and it is on the quiz. You have to have earned income in order to contribute to a Roth IRA or an IRA. In fact, you have to have earned income to contribute to your 401k. So here's what the shovel means, though. When I was 10 years old, at 10 years old, my mom bought our tennis shoes. I had 4 siblings at the time, 3 siblings plus me. That's 4 kids in the family. Had another one come along later. But back in the day, it was just us 4 little runts. And we were all pretty close in age. But my mom did the shopping, and she shopped at Kmart for clothes and tennis shoes. And the tennis shoes that we all wore were Converse canvas tennis shoes. Do you guys know what that is? Converse tennis shoe? You know, canvas means they're cloth, they're not leather, they're not plastic. Converse canvas tennis shoe. I should have a picture. But anyway, Converse canvas tennis shoes, that's what my mom bought. She bought them at Kmart. They cost $4 a pair. And so at that time, when I was about 10 years old, this dude named Julius Erving came on the scene. He was a basketball player. You remember Julius? What did they call him? Dr. J. He was Dr. Dunk to some people. He was like the guy that perfected the slam dunk in every kind of configuration, right? Am I right? He was the guy that made it popular, I think. I went to high school with Magic Johnson, which was later on. Magic was a whole different level of amazingness. They were both amazing beyond, anyway, they were different, right? And so anyway, I went to high school with Magic Johnson, but way earlier than high school, I'm 10 years old, Dr. J comes on the scene. He endorses Converse tennis shoes, and they come out with a totally new look, a leather high top Converse tennis shoe. And Kmart sold those tennis shoes, but they were $10 a pair, which was a lot of money back then. We had 4 kids. I went to my mom. I begged her for a pair of Converse high top leather tennis shoes, the kind that Dr. J was talking about. What do you think she told me? Can't afford it. I'd have to do the same for the other kids. But I was relentless. Mom, please, I have to have these. She's like, well, if you have to have them, you need to talk to your dad, because my answer is no. Dad's never going to give in. If mom doesn't give in, she's the easy one. Dad's not. So I went to Dad. I'm like, Dad, I got to have these, please. He said, okay, I'll make a deal with you, son. And that's when he pulled out the family snow shovel. And he said, you want to make some money? I'll tell you what, you make $6. You come up with $6, and I'll pay the difference, the $4 that we already pay. He checked in with mom to make sure we had the numbers right. He gave me, didn't give it to me, he lent me. He said, you break it, you're going to buy me a new one. Don't break it. He gave me the family snow shovel, and he said, here's what you do. We had just had a ton of snow, like over a foot of snow, which happened pretty regular in Lansing, Michigan, where I lived. He said, I want you to go out and knock on the door, start with the Turners. They take really good care of their yard, and just ask them if they would like to hire you to shovel off their driveway and their walkway. Cool, I'll do that. Took the shovel, knocked on a door. First person that I asked said, yes, we'd love to have you shovel our drive. We'll give you $10. Changed my life forever. So I went and knocked on the next door. Their driveway wasn't as big, and they didn't have as much money, and they offered me less, but it was still worth it. And then I went to the next one, and they said no. The next one said yes. By the time the day was over, I had so much work to do. I had to get some friends who had their own snow shovels to come and help me. And I got home that night exhausted with a wad full of cash. And from then on, the shovel represents work. It represents adding value in the marketplace, however you do that. And for me, it started with shoveling snow, and then it went to lawn mowing. Dad let me borrow his lawn mower. If you break it, you replace it. And then the raking leaves, because every year the trees would lose their leaves and people would want to have their yards raked. That was all work that I could do at 10 years old. And the world became an amazing place full of green stuff for me. And I became an entrepreneur. And so without that, without earning income, by the way, that's on the quiz. Did I tell you that? Earned income is key to all of these types of accounts. Well, with most of these types of accounts, you have to have earned income to do this. So that's why the shovel is there, because I want to highlight this idea of work. If you're willing to work, if you're able to open your eyes and see what's needed in the world you live in, and figure out what skill you have to meet that need and provide that value, I have no doubt you can do the same thing I did, whether it's shoveling snow or, creating the right piece of code to make whatever you do. I mean, I didn't have any special skills, but I was willing to work. And it turns out in my lifetime, being in sales involves asking people and not being afraid that they might say no. And so whatever you do, I mean, maybe that's not your thing, but if that's your thing, that's an entire career opportunity, is being willing to learn how to communicate, how to ask questions, how to listen, and not being afraid that somebody's going to say no. Because that's what stops most people from being successful, is they're afraid somebody's going to say no, and they give up. And that's what the shovel taught me is, hey, if I'm willing to knock on the door, not everybody's going to say yes, it changed my life. And that's why this silly pink shovel is in the picture. So now let's jump into the buckets. So we're talking about types of accounts. Remember last week and the week before we talked about 4 investment strategies designed to help you maximize returns and minimize risk. And before we got into the 4 investment strategies, hey, thank you. That's very sweet.
Just, it's nothing really. It was your birthday yesterday,
Yes, thank you. Friday, my birthday gift. That's very good. Thank you very much. So we talked about 4 investment strategies designed to help you maximize returns and minimize risk. Remember that? But before that, we talked about the perfect investment. What was that? Thank you very much. Yeah, the 401k match was the perfect investment. And I used the example, you worked at Shell, you had an 8% match, you made $100,000 a year, and I helped you understand how that worked by telling you those facts, right? And you got to contribute 8%. Day one, when you get your job, they're going to ask you, do you want to participate in a 401k? And your answer is going to be absolutely. The next question is, how much do you want to contribute? And that's where you're going to have to figure out what? Yeah, what's the match? How much do I have to contribute to make sure I get the full match at least? So that's the perfect investment. And by doing that, by signing up for your 401k, taking advantage of the match, the perfect investment. Yes, question.
Do they ask like a percentage of your salary or an amount? Like, if you say I'm going to $600,
That's a good question. The question is, do they ask you when you sign up, when you start working? Sorry, I'm chewing ice from this wonderfully delicious cold Starbucks. What is this? Iced coffee with cream? And it's got sugar in it? Mine's perfect. I mean, I wouldn't say it has too much sugar in it, which is good because my wife would slap me. She's a keto enthusiast, and I'm supposed to be, but I like sugar. Anyway, so where was I? The question. So the question is, when you sign up for your 401k, when you go through that first day in HR, do they ask you for a percentage or a dollar amount for your 401k? And I don't know the answer to that. It depends on who you have in your HR department. When I came to work for State Farm as a claims adjuster, not as an agent, before I was an agent, I was a claims adjuster. And I'll never forget this dude named Mark. Mark is a State Farm agent in Giddings, Texas right now. But Mark was the HR guy for me. I was clueless. And I'm looking at all this and I'm going, yeah, I guess I know I want to sign up for the 401k because I liked saving money. But I had no idea what I wanted to invest in, like the asset allocation. And Mark, this young guy out of college who was much smarter than me, he said, you'd be an idiot not to put your money in equities. Like, what's an equity? Do you guys know what an equity is? It's a stock. It's not a bond. It's not, the money market. It's stocks. I'm like, hey, he's smarter than me. He probably shouldn't have said that. He was giving me investment advice, which was probably not appropriate for an HR guy, but he didn't care. He was telling me what he knew. You'd be an idiot not to invest in equities. I didn't know better. But I said, he's smarter than me, so I signed up 100% in equities. Dude, did that work out well? 1989, I'm putting all my money in equities and the biggest bull market in history. So it worked out really well. But it just depends on your HR person. You need to be smart enough to know that you want to invest in equities and that you want to make sure you put enough in on a monthly basis so that it equals the match. You may have to do a little calculation or ask your HR person to help you with that. Just tell them, here's my goal. I want to make sure that I contribute every week or every paycheck enough so that by the end of the year, I've contributed enough to get the full match. Help me make sure I do this right. That's what I would do. Be like, just help me here, and they will. So, but it's your job to know what you're trying to accomplish. So we covered that. We covered the perfect investment. 4 investment strategies designed to maximize returns and minimize risk. Let's review those real quick. Number 1 was diversification. I told you the story about a company named Enron. I told you the story about a couple of clients, one who put all of his ducks in one basket. All of his ducks, all of his eggs, all of his duck eggs in one basket, and it turned out very bad. He worked for Enron. He put all of his 401k in Enron stock. He had well over $1 million, lost it all, had terrible anxiety, stressed, heart attack, died, left his widow with nothing. And then there was the woman, Andrea, who was very different. She diversified. And that's the key thing here. She did not put all of her duck eggs in one basket, and it worked out really well for her. She prevented herself from suffering a severe loss because she used this investment strategy, the simplest, most basic investment strategy there is, called diversification, and she avoided having the same experience that Bill had. That was number 1. Number 2 was asset allocation. And I told you that asset allocation is the single most important determinant of your portfolio's returns. And it involves asset classes like large cap, small cap, mid cap, bonds, international, right? And you're going to have to learn a little bit more about those different asset classes. But know that asset allocation is the single most important determinant of your portfolio's returns. It's the best way to help you maximize returns and minimize risk. Number 3 was dollar cost averaging. I told you a story about a guy named Farmer Joe. Farmer Joe, and how he invested in cows, and how the cows started out at $100 a head, and they went down to 50, and he put $100 a month into that strategy for cows. Second month he bought 2 cows. The third month he bought 4 cows, and then he bought 5 cows, and then the price of cows started going. He used dollar cost averaging, the single most powerful investment strategy available to young people over a long period of time, hands down. When the market crashes, you're doing your plan, your dollar cost averaging, your 401k is automatically doing dollar cost averaging into the assets that you selected, equities, like Mark said, but instead of just one set of equities, instead of just large cap, maybe you're doing large cap and small cap and international and maybe a little bonds, but equities. Over time, dollar cost averaging is going to be a huge, powerful strategy for you to build wealth. So that was number 3. Number 4 was pretty simple. It's like dollar cost averaging. It's called portfolio rebalancing. Because remember, we took a circle, we cut it into 4 quarters, and we said we put a different asset class into each piece of the pie. And over time, just like those cows, one of those asset classes got really big, one of them got really small. And what did we do to maximize returns and minimize risk using the strategy called portfolio rebalancing? What did we do when one of those quadrants exploded and the other one shrunk? What did we do to maximize our returns and minimize our risk? What would you do if your portfolio was 25% in each class, in each quadrant, but then one of those turned into like 60% of your portfolio?
Bring it down to 25 and reinvest that 40 or 35 into the other ones.
Exactly. You would sell off some of those big winners, that big quadrant. Make sure you save your profits because every asset class goes up and goes down. They just don't do it at the same time. And that's why portfolio rebalancing means that you get to take those profits while they're huge, just like Farmer Joe didn't sell his cows when they were trading at $20 a head. What did I tell Farmer Joe to do? sell his John Deere tractor that he just bought and go buy cows. He didn't do that, but that's what I'm talking about. And so to do portfolio rebalancing, basically that's what you're doing. You're selling these assets that exploded so that you save your profit, and then you take that money and you put it into the asset classes that shrunk, because those asset classes are probably going to be the next one that goes real high. Very simple, right? Those are the 4 strategies designed to help you maximize returns and minimize risk. But here's the thing. If you're doing those strategies in a non-tax advantaged way, every time you do one of those strategies, every time you sell that big piece of your portfolio because you have all that profit, you're going to pay tax on that. And so that's what this blue bucket represents. This blue bucket represents a non-tax qualified type of account. We call it taxable because you pay taxes on it. Okay, so I'm going to go over 4 types of accounts, but this first type of account is just a regular account with no tax benefits. You pay tax on the growth. And so it's important. You need one of these. It's unlimited. That's why it's a big blue bucket. It's plastic, which means it's not very well protected. If you get sued, I can sue you and get the assets in this bucket. There's no special thing about this bucket. It's yours. It's your account, but it has no tax benefits. So that's the big blue bucket. Any questions about that bucket? Again, every one of these buckets are a type of account. So the first type of account I want you to understand is a taxable account. And the reason it's taxable, it's not tax qualified. Okay? So that's the first one. And then I already talked about the shovel. What do you think this big brown metal bucket might stand for? What type of account might this big brown bucket stand for? IRA? Not yet. One of them does stand for the IRA, but this one represents a different type of account. It's the biggest tax advantaged type of account you will have access to. 401k. Yes. Hold on. That is good. So yeah, this big brown kind of ugly bucket, it represents the workhorse of types of accounts. Now, I want to say, we say 401k because it's the most common type of retirement plan that companies provide. But what if you work for the government? What if you work for a charitable organization? What if you're a teacher? What if you work at a school district? They don't have 401ks. So the 401k is just the header on the paragraph in the IRS code. And the IRS code is like 6 million pages long. So their paragraphs, types of accounts are distinguished by which paragraph they're in. So 401k is the paragraph that tells you in the IRS code what the rules, boundaries, and limitations are for your 401k. But if you're a teacher, it would be a 403b. If you work for the government, it would be a 457, I believe. So it's a different chapter, different paragraph, little bit different rules, but it's the big bucket. It's the employer retirement plan, the plan that your employer gives you to help you save for retirement. Does that make sense? That's why it's the biggest, other than the blue bucket, which can be unlimited. This is the big brown bucket. It represents the type of account. The most common is 401k. But it could be a 403b if you're a teacher. If you work for the government, it could be a 457. There are other types of accounts that are basically the same, but 401k is specifically for a company that works for profit. It's the most common one. Make sense? Any questions about a 401k? What do you think happens when you when you quit working for a company? What do you think happens to the money in your 401k? It stays there? So let's unpack that. First, you said it stays there unless you call them and ask them to transfer it to a new employer, to a new 401k. So, no, that's not what happens. So, a 401k, remember, it's an employer plan. So, if you leave that employer, some employers will let you leave the money there. But usually, what you want to do is roll it over. So, you would roll it over into an IRA. Do you know what an IRA stands for? Individual retirement account is incorrect, but it's so close we'll go with it. Technically, IRA stands for individual retirement arrangement. But yeah, we all go with account. That's what it should be. So IRA stands for individual retirement arrangement or account. And so, oh no, that's not good. We came back? Good. So what happens when you, what is the deal? I don't know what's going on here, but excuse me. When you, I think I don't know what, when you leave an employer, you sometimes can leave it there. Some employers are cool with that. But usually the expenses are kind of high, and almost always you're going to have way more options if you move your money into an individual retirement account. So most people will, it's called a rollover, a 401k rollover. You would call your HR people or you would call your 401k administrator and you would say, hey, I've left the company. I want to roll over my funds into an IRA. And then you would set up your own account, an IRA at Schwab or TD Ameritrade or Fidelity or anywhere you want, Robinhood, and you would roll that money over into that account. And the type of account that would be an IRA. So that's what this bucket stands for. It's a big metal bucket. It's not as big as the brown 401k, but it's big because this is the type of account you would use to, when you leave an employer, to take that money and put it into another account with very similar rules, boundaries, and limitations, and it's designed for that purpose. That's your
In
IRA.
an IRA, does your money increase, decrease, or does it stay the same?
It depends. The question is, in an IRA, does your money increase, decrease, or stay the same? So think about that for a minute. First of all, what makes any account go up or down?
What are you investing?
What are you,
Your asset allocation.
your asset allocation? So if you have investments in your account, they could go up or they could go down because the investments go up or down, always. But the thing I want to make sure we understand is when you were in the 401k and you signed up to contribute to the 401k, every time you got paid, money went into your 401k account and your company matched it. So in the IRA, once you roll it over, you're not necessarily putting any more money into the account. Now you could if you wanted to, but you're not necessarily putting money into the account. It's a rollover IRA. It could be a contributory IRA, just depends on how you set it up. And we'll talk about contributing to it in a minute. But to answer your question, does the IRA go up, go down, stay the same? It depends. If your money, usually what you have invested in your 401k, usually it gets liquidated, it gets sold, and cash money comes into your rollover IRA. They'll send you a check. And you'll go to like Schwab or Fidelity or TD Ameritrade. You'll go online and you'll set up an account, or you'll work with an advisor. Either way, you have a new account now. The type of account that you have is an IRA, a traditional IRA. It could be a rollover, that's what they call it, but it's basically a traditional IRA. And that's what this bucket stands for, the IRA. So let's talk a little bit more about what happens when you leave a company and you have a 401k. What happens next with your money? So you roll it over. Would you think that'd be a good idea to roll it over to an IRA? Why would you or wouldn't you? What can you think of?
I would roll over just because
Well, you'd never want to get the check and spend it because then you're going to pay penalties and you're going to pay tax. So this is on your quiz. If you took that money from the 401k and they sent a check, that check can be deposited in an IRA and it's called a rollover. You have 60 days, I believe, to do that. But if you decide, oh, I'm going to go buy a new house or a new car or whatever, then you spend that money. You now have to pay taxes because remember, in your 401k, you got a tax deduction. It's one of the things that makes it the perfect investment. Remember this scenario, you made $100,000 a year. There was an 8% match. You contributed 8%, the company matched 8%. So now you have 16 grand in your account the first year. And when you do your taxes, the IRS says you only made $92,000 instead of $100,000. So you only pay tax on $92,000. So now you decide to leave that employer. They send you a check because you tell them you left and you want to cancel that 401k. They send you a check and you go spend it. What happens? Now you have to pay all the taxes for that entire amount, however much it is. And you have a 10% penalty on top of that. It's like the dumbest, worst mistake anybody could make, and people do it all the time. Because why? What would you do with that? Say you work there, let's say that you work there for 4 years. How much money would you have in your account if it didn't grow at all after 4 years? If you didn't get a raise and the investments did zero, nothing, it just stayed the same, how much money would you have in your 401k after 4 years of making $100,000 and contributing 8% and having an 8% match? How much?
64,000.
64 grand. So let's say that 4 years later, you're like Billy and Sally. Remember Billy and Sally? And they bought the car and they got the credit cards and they got the house and they have all this debt. And now Billy leaves his job and he's got 64 grand. He's got the check in his hand. What's he going to do with that check?
Pay debt.
Pay debt. Seems like a smart move, right? You saw how much debt he had. You saw how much he's paying for fees and all that. So you'd think that's smart, right? I'd say that's dumb. I mean, it's not the smart thing to do, even when you're Billy.
So if you do roll it over to your IRA and say eventually you do want to take out from your IRA, do you still have to pay penalties and taxes from your IRA?
It depends. That's a great question. The question was, if we roll it over from our 401k into our IRA, do we still pay taxes and penalties if we spend it out of that account instead of our 401k? And the answer is, it depends. If you're 59 and a half years old, you don't have any penalties, but yeah, you still have to pay the tax. So that's what makes this bucket special. It's tax deferred. It's not tax free. We're going to talk about the difference in a minute. This is just like your 401k in terms of it's tax deferred. So you don't have to pay any tax on anything that happens in this account. Let's say that in your IRA, you invested in Apple stock because you're smart and you saw back in 2009, Apple stock was trading at $125 a share. Does anybody know what it's trading at today?
130.
Like 130. So is that a pretty big gain? Not so much. But when you think about what happened to Apple stock, does anybody know what happened to Apple stock? They've done like 4 splits where if you owned 1 share of stock, they gave you 7 shares of stock because the price got so high, they wanted to lower the price. So if you owned 1 share of Apple stock, they gave you 7 shares. So now you have Apple stock at 130. I don't even know what it is trading. I think it's 150 or 60 today. I could check, but I'm not gonna. So now, did you make some money in your IRA? Now, let me just go back and say it wasn't just a one-time split. They've done that like 3 times. So that 100, say you invested in your IRA back in 2009 in Apple stock, and it went, that $100,000 turned into $1 million, and it would have turned into more than that. It would have turned into like $9 million. And let's say today you sell all of your Apple stock. If you did that in the blue bucket, what would you have to do? If you had, let's say you had $10 million in the blue bucket, the taxable bucket, and you sold your Apple stock, and now you have $10 million, no Apple stock, but you've got a gain from 100,000 to 10 million. That's a $9,900,000 gain. What do you have to do? You're going to have to pay taxes. It's a lot of taxes.
So is it even worth it? With all those taxes you have to pay?
Is what worth it?
Like investing that, I guess selling like that many of the apples?
I mean, you'd have to be careful because your
'Cause
basic.
the more money you have, the more taxes.
Exactly. So then there's all kinds of strategies. If you're in a taxable account, how are you going to do that? There's a lot of things you could do as opposed to selling it and paying the taxes. But, the point was, let's pretend instead of that taxable account, it's in your IRA. Because you had $100,000 in your IRA in this type of account, in this bucket, back in 2009, and you said, I'm putting it all in Apple stock. And you just waited until today. And then you said, okay, I think the market's getting ready to crash. I'm going to sell my Apple stock. And now you have $10 million in this type of account. Now what do you have? Do you have to pay tax on that? Not until you take it out.
Isn't that the same amount of tax though? It's a lesser tax.
Maybe not, because if you don't, you sold all the stock today. If you had it in a taxable account, you have a taxable event for this tax year, which means your tax bracket is going to go wacky. You're going to pay yeah. So in this account, though, let's say that when you get to be my age, I'm 60. I just turned 60 on Friday, on tax day. Thank you very much. So then after you're 59 and a half, you start taking it out. But let's say you only take out 50 grand a year and you're still in a really low tax bracket. That's way smarter. Now you can live off that $10 million. You take 100,000 out and you're going to be, in a still pretty low tax bracket, right? As opposed to what would have happened if that was all in a taxable account. You saved your market's going to crash. Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, but the point is, if you're in a taxable account, you pay taxes. It's an immediate tax event for that tax year, which could take you to a high tax bracket. But if you're doing tax-advantaged investing, it's a very different story. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now let's go back and start again. You've got the money in that brown bucket, and you leave the employer, and you want to do the rollover, but instead of working there for 4 years, let's say you work there 2.5 years, and you put your $8,000 in. Again, you make $100,000, you contribute $8 because you want to get the match. Let's say 2 years and 11 months, you decide you're going to go to work, leave Shell, and go to Marathon. And now you're going to do your rollover, right? How much money are you going to get to roll over? You said after 4 years it was 64 grand, but I'm saying 2 years and 11 months. Can you do that math for me?
It's like slightly less. Well, is it like vested?
Is it vested? Big, very important question. Because vesting means that your money, the money that they contributed, you are now vested and you get to keep it. But typically, if you leave before 3 years, you're not vested and you lose all of the money that they matched. So how much would that be then? How much would you be able to move in, roll over into your IRA if you left at 2 years and 11 months?
It's like 16,000 plus. Supposed to be like 7,000.
Yeah, that's a good enough guess. So 8,000 for first year, 8,000 for the second year, and let's say 7,000 for the third year. No match, just 8 plus 7 is 16, 23. So you get to roll over 23. Now, if we did 3 years, then we get the full vested match, which would be 3 years times 16 would be 40 what? 48 grand versus how much?
For 2 and 11 months.
Yeah. 23 or 48. 23 or 48. How much are you going to make? How much more are you going to make at Marathon per year? And how long is it going to take you to make up that gap? My point here is not just tax advantaged investing, but being smart about leaving your employer too frequently without knowing the cost. Okay? Vesting is hugely important. I had a client who went from, he was really smart, really talented, and he was working his way up the chain, the corporate ladder, but he kept leaving one company, going to another company, and he lost every match he ever made. He eventually started his own business after like 10 years in the corporate world, but he left every company before he got vested and missed every dollar of the match.
And do all companies allow you to roll over, or do some not allow you?
So no company lets you roll over until you terminate.
Okay.
And then absolutely, it's your money. You get to move it whenever you want. Some companies will let you keep it there in their plan, and sometimes that's not a bad idea. But most of the time, two things. Most of the time, your old 401k is going to have higher expenses. And almost always, I would say always, your old 401k is going to have way fewer options. Like, for example, I don't know of any 401ks from most companies where you could buy Apple stock. Now, some companies are being innovative, giving you the flexibility to do that kind of thing. But most of the time, they have a set number of mutual funds or index funds, and they're not bad, but they have expenses, and they're not near as flexible, and they don't have the options you would have if you went to TD Ameritrade, Schwab, Fidelity, Robinhood, wherever. So most of the time you want to roll it over into a 401k, into an IRA, because now you get to have unlimited options. You get to manage it yourself with no fees. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
So we've covered the big blue taxable bucket. We've covered the 401k type of account, which could mean if you're a teacher, a 403b. If you're a government worker, it could be a 457, but it's the same idea. It's the big bucket that your employer helps you fill up, and it's got higher limits than any other retirement account. So it gives you the opportunity to put more money away for retirement in your employer bucket, the 401k. Yes?
If you were the guy in your example about how he kept jumping companies and was missing all the matches, would it make any sense to still then contribute that 8% to meet the match, or should you just take that 8% that you would have?
That's a good question. So the question is, my friend who jumped from company to company, would it have made sense for him to just not even make the contribution for the purpose of getting the match, which he never got, or to just do something else with the money? That's a good question. Probably if he knew he wasn't going to stay there, he'd probably be better off putting his money into an IRA directly and having more options. But it just depends. I mean, like in a couple of those years, he put a lot more money into his 401k than he would have been allowed to put into an IRA. And even though he didn't get the match, he got the tax deduction. So remember, the tax deduction is an important part of that perfect investment. So I don't know. It just depends. It's a good question, though.
But the IRA also is like tax deduction.
Yes. So we call this an IRA. A traditional IRA is one thing we call it. Some custodians like Schwab might call it a rollover IRA because they set it up with the purpose of receiving a rollover from your company. Some people would call it a contributory IRA, it's all the same thing, and that's not on your quiz. But different custodians call it contributory IRA, rollover IRA, but it's basically a traditional tax deductible IRA, which means the funds, the money in this is tax deferred. That's different than tax free. It's tax deferred because you don't pay tax until you take the money out. So it's deferred. That's important. That is on your quiz. The difference between tax free and tax deferred. Tax deferred is your IRA, your 401k. Those are tax advantaged. They're all tax advantaged. But tax deferred is distinctly different from tax free, which is better. Tax free is better. And we're going to jump into that now. Any questions? Let me see if I got any questions in the chat. No questions in the chat. If you guys on Zoom have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, let's go. We're looking for the gold bucket. So we talked about the big blue bucket, the taxable bucket, the 401k big brown metal bucket, the IRA, there's the shovel again. Here's the tax-free bucket. So the reason that it's smaller is because, and the reason that, first of all, the reason it's gold is because it's tax-free. There's no other tax-free investment that I know of. The reason it's smaller is because this is different than the IRA bucket, the traditional IRA, the rollover IRA. The bucket that you roll over your 401k into can be a much bigger bucket because you're rolling over however much you have in your 401k, and it can be a lot. So that's a bigger bucket. This is a smaller bucket because you can't roll over money from your 401k into a Roth IRA. It's a different type of account. It's a tax-free type of account. So let's talk about. Who has a question? Oh, thank you. Hey, Professor, I was wondering. Hold on. No questions, thanks. I was wondering if we can have a workshop for the capstone. Yes! You must have come a few minutes after we did that. We are going to have a workshop. You want me to highlight what that looks like right now? No? In a bit. Remind me in a bit. I will remind you before I shut down for today how the capstone workshop is going to work. But yes, we've been talking about that today, and yes, we will. So I'll tell you about that after we finish here. So back to the Roth IRA. So what's the difference between tax-free and tax-deferred?
Tax deferred, you don't have to pay until you take the actual money out.
Nope.
Tax free is tax.
Yeah, so that example I gave you with Apple stock, let's say that you were like my friend JD, who started investing in his Roth IRA, and I think it was 1998 they started that. And let's say he had $100,000 in his Roth IRA, and in 2009, when Apple stock was trading at $125 a share, he took his entire $100,000 Roth IRA and bought Apple stock with it. How much would it be worth today? About based on what we see. Yeah, we could say 9 or 10 million. Let's just say 10 million. I'm not sure. We could go do the math. It's a lot. It's a huge amount, whatever. So because the stock has just gone up, 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 it's split multiple times. So now what happens when he decides today to sell all of his Apple stock? Does he pay tax? No. In fact, it's no different than in his IRA account. The tax deferred part, the selling, that transaction makes no difference. But what does make a difference is now let's say that he's 60, he's me, I turned 60 Friday. Now I can take money out with no penalty and no tax. Are we losing power?
So it's until you are a certain age, that's when you can take out the money without paying your taxes.
Correct. Both. Well, right, the penalties. So at 59 and a half, you can take it out without paying a penalty. So, but the Roth IRA, the beautiful thing about the Roth IRA is now I'm 60, I can take money out without a penalty, but I can also take that money out without any taxes. So, how much do I have in my Roth IRA in my scenario? $10 million. I mean, it's an unbelievable amount of money. Even if it's $5 million, that's still for a $100,000 investment in 2009. It grew to a gobs of money, and it's in a Roth IRA. And now I'm 60, and I can take the money out. And what if I want to buy a house, buy a car, buy a new RV? Do I pay tax on that? No tax. Do you see why it's a gold bucket? It's different than any other bucket. So you know the difference between the Roth IRA and a 401k?
But why don't we pay tax?
Well, you've already paid the taxes. So with a Roth IRA, when you put money into a Roth IRA, you do not get a tax deduction like you do when you put money into a 401k.
So it's honestly smarter. IRA better than 401k.
Roth
Roth IRA.
Well, I mean, it depends. So if I make a lot of money today and I don't like paying a high tax bracket, if I can put money in a 401k and max out that bucket and reduce my tax bracket, that's smart because that's real money. And maybe when I'm 60, I'm not needing that much money. My tax bracket's going to be much lower. So it's not as cut and dried as it might seem. But when it comes to investing, the more money I can have in this tax-free bucket, now if I'm a smart investor, if I'm good at making money with investments, that's a little different. Now we're talking about having this, these returns that I don't have to ever pay tax on. And that's what I like about the Roth IRA. But from a tax saving perspective, it's not as cut and dried as it might seem just from the income tax deduction part. But if you think taxes are going to go up in the future, then you probably want to be putting money in a Roth IRA. If you think your taxes are going to go down in the future, then maybe the tax deduction today is a better deal.
I have a question. What's the difference between the Roth 401k and the Roth IRA?
Great question. What's the difference between the Roth 401 or 401k Roth, I think is what it is, and just a regular Roth IRA? So the 401k Roth is really relatively new. I have no clients who have that option right now because it's new. So actually, I might have some clients that have that option, but they haven't told me about it. I don't have that option. I never had that option. It wasn't even available when I was in the corporate world. It's that new. So the difference is a 401k is a bigger bucket, and the Roth IRA is a small bucket. So the difference is with your 401k Roth, if you have that opportunity, that tends to be a much bigger bucket. So now you can put more money in a Roth inside your 401k. And that's a really nice thing. Great question. It's beyond the scope of your quiz, but it is a really relevant question. It's just something that's relatively new. But that's really the answer is if you do it in your 401k Roth, tends to be a bigger contribution amount that you can make.
What if I do the 401k Roth and do the matching and I don't know.
I think you can do that. Like you can do the match, and I'm not sure if they match the Roth too, but yeah.
If I have that option, I should just go for it.
I mean, you should think about it. Yeah. If you can get a match in your Roth and your 401k, I would do that. I would do that without a doubt because I know what kind of power you have when you start investing with a Roth over your lifetime. Question?
With that 401k Roth, is that contribution deductible and then it's also tax free?
Yeah, no. If it's in a 401k Roth, it would be the same type of deal where you're contributing before tax dollars into that part of your 401k. So you got to remember that the thing that makes a Roth IRA a little different is you're using before tax. So you, I mean, yeah, after tax, after you've already paid taxes. Sorry.
Then how's the 401k Roth work? It's before tax deductible, but
Well, no, the Roth part would be after you pay taxes.
also, yeah, I'm confused with the 401k Roth part.
So, for example, with the traditional 401k, for example, if you get 1,000 for a month, I don't remember.
Yeah.
And you put, I don't know, like 100 in your 401k, then on your taxes, it only shows your income as 9,000.
Yeah, so basically it's not that different. If you're doing a 401k Roth and you decide you want to put all your money in that part of your 401k, you don't get any tax deduction for that part of your contribution.
Oh,
But if you're doing it into the traditional 401k, you do get a deduction, but you now have that option with a 401k Roth, which never used to be a part of the plans, but it's relatively new.
so it's basically just a Roth IRA.
Yeah, but it's a bigger bucket. It's like the reason you would do it at work instead of an individual retirement account is because you could put more in it at work. The drawback would be you'd have limited options with how you could invest it at work. You're still going to have more options. So when you roll it over, now you get to roll it over into a Roth if you contributed to a Roth, a 401k Roth. Does that make sense? I know it's a little confusing, but just think of it as the tax-free part and the tax deferred part. If you're doing a tax-free Roth, that money you've already paid tax on. And the other one you get a tax deduction. I had two questions.
Do companies offer the Roth 401k, or is that something that you have to do on your own?
No, some companies offer it. Not all companies offer it, but like I said, since it's relatively new, a company would have to go and find a plan provider who built that into their plan. Not every company's done that. A lot of companies don't have that option, but a lot of companies are making that an option now.
Like check your job application when you're paying for a job, check on that.
Yeah.
When you're applying, or when you said companies kind of like match you, or when you said that, how often does that happen?
So that's a good question. The question is, when you get a company match, how often does that happen? And I think most of the time that happens at the end of the year. So whatever their fiscal year is, if you're contributing monthly or every paycheck, which is how you want to do it in your 401k, your contributions will be immediately showing in your account value. But I'm pretty sure that the company match shows up all at one time at the end of the year, or maybe even the beginning of the next year, but not like it doesn't accrue as you're contributing. And I may be wrong about that. I'm not really sure, but I'm pretty sure that it shows up all at one time. So you get this really cool, oh, cool, it just went up $8,000 or $5,000 or whatever.
You're like losing money then a little bit. You're losing, not getting that 8,000 isn't worth as much as it would be.
I mean, no, you got to think long term, but yeah, because the truth is, like, if you're investing in cows and they're $20 a share today, but you're not getting your match until the end of the year when they're back up to $100 a head, that's a bummer, and that's kind of the reality. But it could work the other way too. But yeah.
If you have your own business, you can offer it to 1K to your employees.
Yep. But it costs money. Like I have a business. If I had employees, I could set up a 401k, but I'd have to set it up, pay the fees, and it's expensive. And it's work too. It's not just expensive. It's like a lot of work. So it's a good thing. It's a benefit.
And why companies do it, there's no tax, I don't know, deduction because they're companies.
Oh yeah, they get a deduction. So the company that's matching, they get to deduct all of that from their top line too.
That's what I thought.
When you're looking for a job, what are the most important benefits that you look at?
Probably health insurance is right up there with 401k, and sick leave, and there's so many. I mean, those are the basics, though: health insurance, 401 retirement planning, and the benefits that I think are the most valuable would be things like, if you're sick and you can't work, you still get paid. Like that's a really nice value. And disability benefits, so that if you're, if you get sick or you get hurt and you can't work for 6 months or 5 years, their benefit pays you. Like that's a nice, really, that's an expensive benefit. It's a really nice benefit. Um, and I've seen that happen with a lot of families where, without that coverage, you have a huge risk.
I have
So,
a question.
yes.
For the railroad and the capstone activity, we can put a Roth 401k on the
Yeah, sure. I'm pretty sure that's an option, but yeah, you would want to do a little research, make sure you understand what the distinction is. But yeah, you might even get extra points if you decide to put in a 401k Roth instead of just a regular Roth IRA in your plan. I'd be really impressed.
Is that an option? That's an option.
I don't know if I think it is an option. Check. It is an option. Cool. I need to get more familiar with it, honestly, because it's a beautiful, it's a great upgrade, excuse me, to a 401k plan to be able to do a 401k Roth.
And what is the capstone?
Okay, let's talk about the capstone because I'm pretty much done unless you have questions about types of accounts, tax advantage investing. So now I'm going to transition to do a quick review of the capstone and the capstone workshop. So see you later. Take care. So the capstone, that assignment will be assigned next week. I believe I got to check the syllabus because I got a little out of whack, but I believe it's going to be assigned next week. You get 2 weeks to complete it. So next week we're not going to have class. I think you came in a little late today.
Yes. And I'm sorry, the Bay Rock is part of the capstone, right?
Yeah.
The Bay Rock.
Yeah. That's where you're building your plan.
Because today, or not today, but the assignment that was due this morning, week 10, I think it was, that has to do with the capstone, right? The
Yep.
retirement and-
Yes, many of your assignments, like the Credit Crush, had to do with the capstone. Your budget was built into the capstone. So every week, not every week, but most of every week, you've been building a part of your capstone. And then when you do the capstone assignment, you're just really taking all of those pieces and putting them together to create kind of a comprehensive financial plan based on all of the data cards you built throughout the semester. So let me tell you about the capstone workshop that we're going to do next week, and it's got 2 big goals. So this is a summary of the capstone workshop coming to a station near you next week. We will not have class next week. We will have one Zoom meeting that will be recorded. So if you're in the 11:30 session, you'll have to watch the recording. If you're in the 10 a.m. session, there will be a Zoom meeting. You're welcome to log in, same as ever. But that's the one that will be recorded. Here's what we're going to do. This week's assignment, your class collaboration is going to be, you're going to post somewhere your question, like what is it that you're needing help on, or you want a little clarification, or what is it about your financial plan that you have a question about, because I'm going to take all of those questions and I'm going to create a capstone workshop that has 2 goals. One is to make sure that I teach you a good, solid overview of the financial planning process that you've learned all semester. That's my goal. Your goal, though, the second objective, excuse me, is to make sure that you're able to check all of the boxes in your capstone so that you earn all 200 points without missing anything. So that's where your questions and your comments this week come into play, and that's why I'm making it part of your class collaboration this week for you to, if you got a real question, email me with as specific question as possible. But if you're just generally puzzled about this, that, or the other thing, just post it. I'll see your post. I'll be collecting those. And between now and next week, I will create a capstone review that will be the capstone workshop for next week. If you're available at 10 a.m., you'll be able to ask questions. I'm going to try to create a pre-packaged video so that it's all clear and concise. I'll play that video, and then at the end of that, I'll be here to talk through any questions you have. So that's the workshop. That's next week. No class next week. And then you'll have 2 weeks to do your capstone. So as I get questions, if I see that there's something that continues to be a question, I'll do another tutorial to help you with the capstone. Yes?
I know you mentioned this before, but my school is saying that we want to keep the Bayrock website.
Great question. So for those of you who want to continue learning about financial planning and you want to keep your Bayrock planning portal intact, part of the workshop is going to be introducing you to the next steps, which is just basically if you go to missionalmoney.com, you will enroll in another course. That course has the same planning portal. So I just need to know that you want to stay on board, and then I won't delete your plan. There's no cost. It's for all students in this semester, previous students, students who are thinking about joining. So I'll do like a promo section in the capstone workshop to say, here's a place you can go to keep learning. And if you haven't taken the course yet, you can get a head start. So that great question. Any other questions? Let me check my Zoom chat. So Ardavan, I hope you got that question answered. The workshop, the capstone workshop, thank you for asking. And no questions in the classroom, no questions online. If you've got a question, if you're watching on YouTube later or Facebook, you can post your question and grab a screenshot. Again, this week's class collaboration is you're responsible for saying, here's one area of my financial plan that I could use a little help, a little extra clarification, or just a general observation about if you're doing great and you don't have any questions, feel free to leave a comment just telling me what you think about the overall process. But that's your class collaboration, is tell me about your financial plan, where you need some help, where you might need some direction, some things you struggled with, or just in general, hey, it worked great for me, that's fine too. But that's a screenshot, post it in Money Study Group, post it on Facebook, YouTube, not in GroupMe. GroupMe is not qualified for this one. If you email me, that's great too. If you have a real question and you really want my help, please send me an email in addition to the screenshot. Okay? All right. It's been really fun being with you guys. Thanks again.
Happy early birthday.
Thank you. It's actually late.
Oh, late.
I was Friday.
Oh, it was this past Friday.
Yeah,
Oh,
Good
okay.
Friday.
Well, happy late birthday.
Thank you very much. Yes, tax day is my birthday,
So
April
Easter
15th.
weekend, too.
Yep,
My
sometimes.
My birthday was April 5th, my 21st birthday.
Oh,
so it was a big
sweet.
one.
Yeah. And mine's 6th. I'd rather have yours. I would trade you in a heartbeat.
I just got back from Mexico, so.
Where'd you go in Mexico?
Cabo.
Oh, nice.
It was very fun.
Was it at one of those all-inclusive things?
Yes, all-inclusive resort.
And you were able to consume adult beverages.
Yes, I was. Well, the drinking age there is 18.
Oh, so you were.
Yeah, so even younger I could have gone.
Oh, good. Thank you so
we'll
much.
see you not next week, but the week after.
Actually, no.
No?
I'll be online next week, and the next one after that will be online too.
Okay.
So this is it.
This is it.
I mean, I'll still be available, but I
Yeah.
won't be back in class.
Okay, so we'll email you if we have any questions.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Well, thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you. Okay, let's see. I don't think I shut down. I'm going to shut down. Goodbye, everybody. I'm going to leave now and finish the broadcast and end the Zoom meeting. And we'll see you next week for the capstone workshop. Yeah, do what?